Today, I wanted to talk about some considerations that you should make when you're grinding coffee, why it's not as linear as you might hope it is. It's not like one grind setting equals the grind size that you're looking for, and there's a lot that goes into that I wanted to touch on and cover. So, it's an opportunity to have an overview of the considerations you need to make when you're grinding coffee, and we'll end with the you know good rules of thumb for common grind sizes for your favorite brew methods. So we're going to hit on why grind setting doesn't equal grind size, and why not all coffee particles are created equal and what that even means. And then, as I said, go through your favorite brew methods and at least give you a super high level overview of if they're typically brewed with a fine grind or a coarse grind, and why that is. So let's get right into it. So why grind setting doesn't always equal grind size? There's the three main things that I think are really important to think about. And so definitely there is a broad range of equipment out there, so you can appreciate how the quality of your tools becomes a factor. But the first two things that I really want to touch on have to do with the coffee bean itself. So roast degree heavily influences the density of the coffee bean. If it's a darker roast and it's less dense, it's going to break up easier during grinding. When it breaks up, it shears and creates a lot of small particles that we call fines. Fines disproportionately influence the brewing process. They can really slow it down, and they're quite a significant thing to consider when you're having a ground coffee mass and needing to brew coffee. And so the inverse is true. If you have a light roast, it is more dense, it's harder to break up. And so if you have that one grind size, one grind setting that someone recommended to you, and you took two different coffees on them, a dark roast and a light roast, you get a different result just because of the roast degree or really the density of the coffee bean that you're grinding up. And so on a similar note, the second on this whole topic of why grind setting doesn't equal grind size is the moisture of your coffee beans. The vast majority of specialty coffees are going to be relatively light in moisture. If you're somebody who enjoys more commercial medium roasts or dark roasts, the larger scale that you roast at, the more difficult it is to cool beans in a short and meaningful time frame to not degrade quality further after roasting. And so people will actually mist and spray water on the coffee once it's exited the coffee roaster, and this is called quenching. If done correctly, it doesn't really add much moisture to the beans. It evaporates almost immediately, and that evaporative cooling does its job. But often enough, you add some moisture in there. And even for specialty coffee lovers like myself and most of you listening to this channel, I believe, you'll be familiar with the Ross droplet technique, where we're literally spraying water on whole beans to increase the moisture content to reduce static in a lot of cases, but you're also increasing moisture, obviously. And the more moisture that you have in a roasted coffee bean, the more pliable it gets. And so this whole dynamic of fines production comes back in again. So if it's dry, it's brittle, there's a high production of fines, which is going to translate like a finer grind size. And if it's more moist, it's less brittle, more pliable, less fines, it's going to flow a little quicker. And so the third thing in this consideration is the quality of your burrs. And so there's burr sets out there of varying qualities, and there's ones that are specifically targeting a low fines production when you're actually doing the grinding event itself. And so the quality of your burrs is going to really matter in terms of why you might get a different result on a similar setting, but you're talking about different burr geometries or different burr types on the same grinder, or you're trying to compare apples to oranges between your setup and somebody else's. And so this is an important one. It's just the actual quality of the metal that's grinding your coffee. And on this note, interestingly, and if you're a barista, you'll definitely have observed this, if you have a lot of weight on top of the coffee burrs, like your hopper is full of coffee beans and you have some downward pressure there, it's going to basically create a backlog inside the actual burrs themselves. So as whole beans get crushed up and become ground coffee, and they're making their way sort of like on the travel path through the burrs, it's a relatively small exit, right? You're making the particles a lot smaller. And so the more weight you have on top, the more that kind of gets backed up like a traffic jam. And then when that happens, you actually get more fines being produced because you're getting crushing happening, which is kind of like an even messier, higher fines production sort of event than you otherwise would if you didn't have all of those beans pressing down on it. So you can influence the flow rate of your coffee brewing and the particle size distribution that you get by kind of mitigating all of that and just dropping the beans in slowly and sort of slow feeding. So another interesting, contributing factor to why you can't just have, grind setting 6 be your holy grail for all applications. So a lot already, right? And so I want to now touch on 3 different reasons why your varying particles are going to influence your brewing and then the flavors that you get. And I'll kind of like loosely nest them in common methods for particle size analysis. The first 2 are industry standards. That would be like sieving your coffee. If any of you have the Crew sieve set, that's sort of like a home version of a more commercial system that's called like a road tap. But at any rate, it's machined metal mesh with set pour openings, and you have tiers of different openings, and then you put a certain amount of coffee in, shake it up, and then measure the weight in each of those tiers, and then you kind of tabulate it and get a sense of where your average is and where things are sitting. And the really small fine particles should shake out to the bottom. And so it's those fine particles that we've talked about so much that although they might make up a small percentage of weight of your overall ground coffee mass, they have a big influence on flow rate, like disproportionately so. And they will really slow down your brew if you have them in a high quantity. This is ostensibly a great thing for espresso. Generally, people want a minimal amount in drip coffee, but they certainly have a big impact on brewing dynamics and definitely flavor because you can extract almost all the solubles in a superfine particle. Fines are generally defined as particles less than I think about 200 microns. A coffee cell is about 50 microns, 40 to 50 microns, I believe, and so you can get all the solubles out of those fines like almost immediately. And so the context that they brew in, whether that's high agitation, hot water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, big impacts on flavor. The second method of analysis is laser diffraction. This is fast, common, gives you a really great snapshot of the average size that you've ground your coffee at. We're probably, you can easily find laser diffraction particle size analysis graphs, and they're bimodal. You have like a little bump for the amount of fines, and then you have hopefully a relatively high and unimodal peak. A lot of people are pursuing that sort of like really tight narrow band, a unimodal peak to indicate like grind performance. And so that's fantastic in a lot of ways. That gives you a good sense of your grind performance, your average particle size. But I had kind of dubbed this section, not all coffee particles are created equal. And so one blind spot, if you will, to laser diffraction is that it's sort of 2D analysis. It bounces the laser off a particle back again, and then it tells you how big it is. And so coffee breaks up in really irregular ways. All the coffee particles are irregularly shaped. Generally speaking, the more you go towards fines, the more spherical they are. But certainly when you're in that ballpark range of common brewing sizes, 300 microns and up to about a millimeter, they are just oddly shaped. And so you can imagine that if you had something that was like the size of generally the shape of something like that was discus or a rice grain, depending on its orientation, it's going to give you some pretty varying data. And so the third and maybe more fringe, I definitely find it interesting form of particle size analysis is 3D imaging, and it's specifically to get at this. And so you can analyze shape of coffee particles. And so the reason why this is relevant to coffee brewing and the flavors that you get is because if we use this rice grain analogy and think back to what I said about fines almost immediately giving off all their flavor, if you have a particle that reads at 700 microns and it's actually the long view of a grain of rice, that's not very deep at any given point. It might be, you know, 2 or 3 coffee cells deep, and you can kind of get the solubles in and out of that particle relatively easy. But if you had a little bit more of a spherical sweet potato shaped coffee particle at the same sort of size, instead of having 3 cells deep, you might be, five, much greater, and so the water that has to get into those deeper layers is going to take longer to do so. And so you're going to get a very different blend of flavors that actually get out of that particle and make it into your final cup of coffee than you would on that sort of rice grain uh, size, right, and shape of particle. And so the degree to which you extract flavor is really influential on your final cup. That's why we measure extraction yield and talk about these things, and it's so important because acids and those more nuanced volatile compounds come out so readily, but some of the other attributes that make for a really balanced, rich, deep, full-bodied coffee are a little bit slower to dissolve, and all the compounds have different dissolution rates, and then you stack on this dynamic of different particle depth and shape, and it's just really um, exactly why it's not as linear as you might hope. But don't be dismayed. There are good rules of thumb. There's a lot of high quality grinders out there, and I won't focus much on really fine coffee brew methods like Turkish and espresso, but Turkish and then espresso are certainly first and second in terms of uh, how finely you need to grind to brew them successfully. And then to give you just some general guidance for grind setting and size and how you're going to approach common brew methods from there, you're going to go AeroPress, which is going to be fine, medium, maybe more in the 400 and 500 micron range. Then you're going to have percolation methods, but manual brew methods like a V60, and then the automatic drip counterparts of those, still with the conical baskets. And then, solidly in the medium grind territory is going to be those same things, manual and automatic, but in a flat bottom shape. And the reason for that is because in a conical shape, there's more opportunities for the water to kind of find an easier and earlier exit out of the coffee bed, areas of less depth before it has an exit point and kind of just runs down the sidewall and into your cup. In flat bottom brewers, much more of the volume of water has to go through the full uh, coffee bed and is comparatively more deep, even though they're all automatic drip methods. And this is why you sit a little coarser. So then we get into French press. This is medium coarse traditionally, and then cold brew is going to be the coarsest. So going from Turkish to cold brew, also a huge difference in contact time, right? And so you have a lot longer to bring out flavor the more you get towards a cold brew compared to like an espresso, for example. And then definitely cold brew, you do not have temperature helping you out, right? Because the energy of hot water helps dissolve flavor, which is true of all the other brew methods. The last thing that I'll say about the coarser brew methods and French press in particular is that they're not filtered, right? And so you can kind of get murkiness from fines making it into your cup, and you can have this like objectively like physically dirtier, murkier drinking experience if you have a lot of fines. And so if you grind coarser, you can mitigate a lot of that, but you run into issues in terms of extracting efficiently. So you might have to go medium coarse and stir and do some other uh, tactics to help make sure you're extracting efficiently in these contexts when you kind of tie one arm behind your back that way. And so I personally prefer a little bit more towards medium for both French press and then cold brew methods. But those are general rule of thumbs for grind size across your favorite brewing methods. So let me know if this holds true for you, if you like a different approach, if you have other thoughts about the conundrum that is trying to grind coffee successfully. Let me know in the comments, and appreciate you watching. Where we go next is anyone's guess. Thanks.